Good deal. We'll just get going. So, just want to welcome everyone, let you know that we are recording this presentation so we can send it out in a follow-up email along with all the wonderful resources our speaker is going to share with us tonight. A little logistical tip, if you are interested in live closed captioning, you can enable that at the bottom of your Zoom window by clicking on live transcript and then show subtitles. Let me know if you have any issues in the chat. And yeah, again, thanks so much for joining this learning program about the autumn hawk migration. I'm Mariah Fogg, the Community Conservation Manager for the Berkshire Natural Resources Council. And in addition to our presenter, I'm joined tonight by Charlotte Hood, our Volunteer and Outreach Coordinator. And first, I'll just share a little bit about BNRC for those of you unfamiliar. The Berkshire Natural Resources Council is a regional land trust actively working throughout Berkshire County on land conservation, land stewardship, and community engagement. BNRC conserves land to protect water resources and wildlife habitat for climate resilience, as well as to connect people to nature through accessibility and engaging activities. Um, and that connection to nature can really take many forms, like enjoying trails in nature, hawk watching, as we'll hear more about soon, and supporting local farms, among many other things. And it can really be deepened by learning about and engaging with the land. So I'd like for us all to pause for a moment and acknowledge the deep connection of the Mohican people to this land, which is their historic homelands. They call themselves the people of the waters that are never still, the Mahicanatuck. And they've lived and cared for what we now call the Berkshires and well beyond for thousands of years before Europeans forcibly seized their lands with neither shame nor remorse. And today, their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. And these lands continue to be of great significance to the Mohican people, with numerous ways to engage, learn, and continue to deepen your connection to these lands. We'll send some resources in the follow-up email as well. So we ask you to please give thought to the native land that you are zooming in from as well. And with that, I will pass it over to Charlotte to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. So we have Ed Neumuth here tonight. He's a retired practitioner of veterinary medicine, a student of the local natural history of the area, and he is a past president and active member of the Hoffman Bird Club, as well as a former compiler of the Central Berkshire Christmas Count. Ed ran a breeding bird survey route for a decade. He has contributed to the Massachusetts Herpetological and Butterfly Atlas projects, and he leads guided hikes for Canyon Ranch and volunteers his time in many capacities with BNRC and other Berkshire organizations. We're very excited to have him here tonight, and we will have a dedicated question and answer session towards the end. So make sure to keep your questions in mind, maybe jot them down along the way. All right, take it away, Ed.
All right, thanks, Charlotte, for that wonderful bio. So tonight we're going to be talking, basically, it's a general overview of fall migration. And Mariah will make this part of the right slide available to people through an email, because this is really what we're going to be talking about. It's the period of time that fall migration takes place and the concentration of each of these birds. So why do birds even migrate? I mean, what's the point of it? Well, I guess I came up with a couple of reasons for this, and we could be talking more about this later, but certainly food availability in the winter is why some of these birds, particularly things like the accipiters, which are bird hunters, there are no songbirds or very few songbirds in the winter, so they need to move. There also could be some maybe intrinsic migratory instincts from glacial times that have persisted. These birds had to move out of this area when it was covered with a mile of ice. And certainly there is another urge to migrate, which is called Zuganru, which is a German term coined by Johann Naumann, who was a German ornithologist, and he was studying orioles and flycatchers, and noticed when those birds, those caged birds, were in fact due to migrate, they became extremely restless. So the term he coined was Zuganru, which is basically the unrest or tugging of the unresting period. So Zug is to tug, and Unru is unrest. Basically, it's the restlessness that takes place in these birds' brains when they are due to migrate. So this is much easier to observe, for instance, in a flock of shorebirds where the weather is temperate, there's food available, and they just feel this restlessness, and you can actually sense it. We probably had this at one point back in our history, but it's a real thing, and it's pretty easy to feel the restlessness of some of these birds when they're ready to move. So the timelines and preferences of their migration times are listed on the right. This is a Hawk Mountain printing. So Mariah will make it available to people on the Zoom presentation. So passerines or perching birds, it's just simply the lack of available food. Seed eaters like sparrows, finches will probably stay around as long as there's not a tremendous amount of snow cover and their food is still available. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about hawks. So we'll try for hawks. Then the next slide, please. All right, so I think in order to understand hawk migration, one of the first things you really need to understand are thermals, which are basically rising columns of warm air. And the conditions that produce thermals, because the primary birds that use thermals are birds that want to lessen their energy expenditure and move over long distances. So bright sunny days with cold air temperatures promote the warming of dark surfaces like parking lots, lakes, and rivers. And these warm air thermals rise in a circular fashion, and the birds, we can't see them, but the birds can pick them up. So this is usually on hilltops and ridges. It's an easy way for them to gain altitude. They will get into a thermal and set their wings and just gain altitude over the course of minutes, and then peel off and in the direction that they're going and try to find the next thermal. So this is one of the most exciting things about hawk watching, is to watch a thermal or watch a kettle of hawks that have found a thermal. So we'll try the next slide, please. All right, so this is just a basic structural picture of some of the different raptors that we're going to be talking about. And we'll be talking about bootios, accipiters, eagles, falcons, harriers, osprey, and vultures as well, because even though they're not hawks, they're often seen during hawk migration. So we'll touch upon vultures as well. Okay, so next slide, please. All right, so this is probably the most widely recognized boodio hawk. It's the red-tailed hawk, and the boodio genus is basically broad-winged, short-tailed hawks. And the British have a term, they call them buzzards. As a rule, they're generally pretty lazy. They're big-bodied, and so they take the thermals to gain altitude and don't want to expend any extra energy if they don't have to. So this is the common highway hawk. They hunt over meadows and grasslands. And I should mention to you that as far as field marks, the juvenile tail is not red. They take 2 years to get their red tail. But there are a couple of other features that are not necessarily obvious on this slide, but they can be helpful to a perched hawk. And that is that red tails, if you're looking at their back, they have a kind of a white V on their back, starting at the shoulders and then moving down toward the tail base. And if you're looking at them from the front, they generally have a belly band, which is like a cummerbund. It's not really terribly dark, but it's noticeable, and it's a great way to tell red-tailed hawks. So let's try the next slide. All right, so a couple of other bootios are the red-shouldered hawk and the rough-legged hawk. So the red shoulder in the spring is a very vocal migrant. I mean, they have this call that they give repeatedly, and when they're flying in the spring, it's a kier, 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 and they just do it constantly. They are best noticed or best identified by the windows in their wings. If you see the outside of that wing on the primaries, there's a sort of a crescent shape window or light area that is fairly visible. They have banded tails, but they are a heavy-bodied boodio bird. The rough-legged hawk, on the other hand, is an irregular winter visitor. In fact, if there some winters, quite honestly, you can't find a rough-legged hawk in the Berkshires. They usually arrive sometime around usually late October, and they'll be around, if they have made it down here from the breeding grounds way up north, they'll be around till perhaps the middle of April. But not a common bird, and we don't really think of it as a bird that you're going to see on a hawk watch because they're so irregular. There are light phase and dark phase rough-legged hawks, which can be a little bit confusing, but the light phase has a white rump patch, which helps identify it. And also, if you're hawk watching in a meadow and you see a bird kiting, that is to say, it's hovering over the area, flapping its wings lightly, but sort of looking down at the ground, it's a kiting roughleg, probably. And that's a tip in field identification. All right, let's try the next slide, Mariah. So this is the broad-winged hawk. This is the quintessential migrant, the bird that in the third week in September, almost the entire North American population of broad-winged hawks migrate down the path that you see on the right-hand side of that slide. They are sometimes in enormous numbers. And in fact, I will relate to you that because they don't like to fly over open water, large parts of open water, they tend to condense around ridges, lake shores, And you can see where around Veracruz, Mexico, they condensed to the point where they cross the isthmus in enormous numbers. So I have a friend, Kevin Carlson, who has seen and witnessed 700,000 broad-winged hawks in a single day passing through Veracruz. They're lazy. They're the quintessential kettle hawk. They tend not to migrate in a solitary fashion like some of the other hawks, but they will find a kettle, or find a thermal rather, and kettle, which the term refers to basically like steam rising from a kettle. It's just a feature that you have to see. In fact, we have a video that we'll play in just a couple of minutes that'll give you a little bit of an idea of a kettle of broad-winged hawks. And sometimes there are hundreds of these. We'll talk a little bit about spots that you can see broad-winged hawks in pretty good numbers. But the field marks on broad-wings, primarily in the adults, it's that very prominent tail band that they have. And structurally, they're a buteo. So they're a big-bodied, broad-winged hawk that likes those thermals. All right, let's try the next slide. So, Mariah, can you show that video, do you think?
Yes, let me see if I can. Can you see that now? The
Yeah.
video? All right, good deal. I'll get it playing for us.
Yeah. So this is a kettle of broad-winged hawks. This is a I mean, this is the thing that makes consummate hawk watchers go year after year to see these kinds of events. This is a major migratory feature. So there they are. You're not seeing many of them flap their wings. They're just going about their business in huge numbers. So Hawk Mountain, I should mention to you that this is Hawk Mountain, and Hawk Mountain's kind of fun. We'll talk a little bit about Hawk Mountain and how it got its name. Hawk Mountain because it's in the Kittatinny Mountains in, I think it's in Kempton, Pennsylvania. It's about 17 miles north of Reading, Pennsylvania. Anyway, it's a major concentration for broad-winged hawks. And back in the day, this is kind of upsetting, but broad-winged hawks were thought to be varmints. They killed chickens and livestock and did all this sort of stuff that isn't at all true. But there was an annual hunt during the third week in September that went up to Hawk Mountain, and shotgun sounded, and hundreds of broad-winged hawks were killed. And so this was pretty upsetting to a woman by the name of Rosalie Edge, who was wealthy enough to purchase 1,400 acres in 1934 and created Hawk Mountain. An interesting sidelight here is that she hired Maurice Braun to keep the hunters away, probably not a terribly safe job at that point. But Maurice Braun, basically, he worked from 1934 till 1966 as the warden at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. Hawk Mountain Sanctuary is now a National Historical Landmark. It's that important. And here's an interesting connection. In Lenox, the Pleasant Valley Sanctuary, Maurice Braun, before he was hired as a warden to keep the hunters off Hawk Mountain, he was the warden at Pleasant Valley. the major caretaker. So, so the number of broad-winged hawks that are recorded yearly from Hawk Mountain, which is one of the classical hawk watch sites. There are many of them, but they will often record more than 20,000 raptors in a year. So it's an amazing place to go. They have a huge number of people that go up there. And I should mention to you that it's probably one of the best places to go because there are experienced hawk watchers there, and they can help you with identification. So some of the other sites we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes, but Hawk Mountain is the consummate hawk watch site, and it's in the Kittatinny Mountains in Pennsylvania. So let's have our next slide. So one of the groups of hawks, the true hawks, are the accipiters. So structurally, accipiters are really designed for their job, which is to catch and kill other birds. They have to eat too. And so they generally have their forest nesters. So their short, rounded tails offer them a couple of advantages: a quick burst of speed and not to get their wings broken as they're flying through the forest. They generally have fairly long tails, and there are three of them, the smallest being the Sharpshinned Hawk, the next in size, the Coopers, and then the largest is the goshawk, which is a huge hawk. It's frighteningly. And yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about sharpshins first of all. The sharpshins tend to shrug their wings or shrug their shoulders while they're flying, so their heads look smaller. Probably the biggest identification error is mistaking sharp-shinned hawks for Cooper's hawks. Because they fly so similarly, they have a flap, flap, flap glide. So they'll flap a couple of times and then they glide for a short period of time, and then they start flapping again. So their flight characteristic is extremely noticeable. It's very different than any other hawk. They have these long tails that act as rudders so they can turn on a dime. And I'll share a brief story. I was up at Moran in Windsor, the Moran Wildlife Area, and I was looking for a boreal chickadee one day. This was back in the winter some years ago. And I remember just making I was in the middle of the woods and I just went, and this sharp-shinned hawk came out of nowhere and flew right at my face, which made the sound, and in a dime turned. It was like 6 inches away from my face, honing in on the sound that I had made with my lips, and it was able to turn that quickly and avoid impaling me with its talons. So they are extremely adept, and sometimes you'll see a sharpshin dive into a bush looking for a songbird. I mean, that's what they do. They hunt other birds. So there's a couple of features that are, besides their flight characteristics, that are noticeable. And one of them is that the sharpshin has usually got depending again on the position that it's flying, but it's usually got a noticeably sharp corners to the tail. An easy way to remember the sharp-shinned hawk. That's not why it's got its name, but they have sharp corners at the tips of their tail. Whereas the Cooper's hawk, which is a little bit bigger, but remember, you have to be awfully careful about size because accipiters in particular, the females are considerably bigger than the males. So a female sharp-shinned hawk can be as big as a male Cooper's hawk. But the Cooper's hawk generally has a rounded tail end, and you can see that clearly on this slide. So But once again, I think the head protrusion and the tail and the flight pattern of the flap flap glide is what really is the key to these accipiters. The goshawk has a huge home range. They're not terribly likely to be seen during a hawk migration day. They're far and few between, but they are a pretty good size bird. They're bigger than like a red-tailed hawk body. They are an accipiter, and they they hunt other birds, very large other birds like grouse, and I guess goshawk means a goose hawk, so they could hunt. I mean, they hunt ducks and they hunt partridge. They hunt pretty good sized prey. So let's try the next slide. So one other thing, I don't know if you could back up, Mariah, but I just want to give you one other tip to identification. And if you think about it, the letter T, this might sound a little bit weird, but if you think about the letter T and you think about a sharp-shinned hawk, it's a capital T because the crossbar on the capital T is not going to give you much of an extension of the vertical part of the T, whereas the Cooper's hawk is more like a small case T, where they don't shrug their shoulders as much, so their head protrusion is further out, and as a result, they are more like a small case T than the capital T. It's just a little tip that might help you identify these pretty hard to identify accipiters sometimes. All right, let's try the next slide again. Thank you. So eagles. So we have a couple of eagles that are possibly present, and we'll start with the bald eagle. This was a bird that seriously declined from DDT. In fact, they were extirpated from the state of Massachusetts as a breeding bird back in the 70s and 80s, when the effects of DDT were still present. So what is the effect of DDT? Well, primarily it's moves and becomes concentrated in the food chain, and these birds, which are the top of the food chain, the prey items, DDT concentrates. So they would absorb this through their food, and it would cause thin eggshells and overheating of the young. So when they were incubating these eggshells, if they didn't break, the young were overheated and they died. So the first bald eagles to nest in Massachusetts were actually hacked at the Quabbin. And interestingly enough, because this is our national bird, they were named the pair of eagles that were named Betsy and Ross. Kind of amusing. They're now widespread nesting in Massachusetts. We have a couple of nesting pairs in the Berkshires. There's one on Anoda Lake. There's another one down by Woods Pond. There's one in let's see, in Great Barrington. So getting to see a bald eagle is not that unusual. During migration, they tend to be a late migrant. They tend to move along the ridges in September and October. October, I think, is the best month to see a bald eagle. It's not a breeding bird here. They can often be confused with golden eagles because the immature bald eagles, and they take 4 years to become adults, where they have the white head and the white tail. They have flecking of white, but when you see the slides of the golden eagle on the next slide, you'll be able to see that the more distinct patches of white on the golden eagle, and it's only the juvenile golden eagles that have white on them. So this slide gives you a little bit of a sense of the upswing of breeding and territorial pairs of bald eagles in Massachusetts. So they like to be around open water. They're kind of scavengers. I mean, they're our national bird, but I know Ben Franklin always thought that the turkey was a lot smarter than an eagle. He was pushing for the turkey, but you'll see them frequently in river edges, picking up dead fish. Sometimes the Quabbin is still a good spot. A lot of times the Quabbin will be frozen over, and there will be a deer that's splayed out and died on the ice, and the bald eagles and golden eagles, for that matter, ravens as well, will all be there to share the banquet. So let's try the next slide. So this is the golden eagle. This is a an incredibly beautiful bird. The golden eagle gets its name because of these golden hackles on its neck. You can see the immature golden eagle on the right, the mature golden eagle on the left, and the patches are distinctly more contained than they are the white flecking of the immature bald eagle. So golden eagles are a late migrant. They're present right now. They're migrating, and you're not going to see many of these. I mean, if you see two golden eagles or three golden eagles in a day at a hawk watch site, you're doing well. So, but this is the best time. Late October, early November is the best time to see golden eagles. I should also mention, if you're interested in film, that there is a wonderful film called The Eagle Huntress that takes place in Mongolia. It's a great film, and it's got some fabulous footage of flying golden eagles. So it's well worth writing that down if you have any interest in golden eagles. It's a pretty great story also. So it's called The Eagle Huntress in a very paternal culture where golden eagles are used to hunt foxes for the winter clothing of these Mongolian people. And this is a young 13-year-old girl that decides she wants to train an eagle, a golden eagle, and her father is incredibly supportive. So they break all the rules, and it's just a great film. So it's called The Eagle Huntress. So golden eagles, they take 3 years as opposed to the 4 years in the bald eagle. They take 3 years to the third year they become adults. So they also soar slightly differently than bald eagles. The bald eagle soars with its wings flat. The golden eagle soars with a very slight dihedral, like not as extensive as a turkey vulture, but they do have a slight upturn to their wings when they're soaring. So I should mention, and we'll get to the next slide, but I'll mention the difference at some point between soaring and gliding, which is kind of interesting. So our next slide, Mariah. All right, so a couple of other birds that don't really fall into the buteo, accipiter, or falcon category would be, one is the osprey, and this is the poster child for DDT resurgence. So they are fish hawks, so they need to be near open water. They do migrate through the Berkshires, but they will be confined to lakes and ponds where there is open water. They are, like I said, you can see on the right-hand slide of this slide, the concentration in parts per million of DDT as it moves up the food chain. And this was the bird that in 1970, there were approximately 10 active osprey nests in the entire state because of DDT. Thin eggshells, like I mentioned in the eagles, and the young would overheat before they were even hatched. DDT was banned in 72. The population began to rise, and now there are more ospreys than there were prior to DDT in the first place. So they're primarily an open water bird. You will see them in migration from hawk watch sites. And they're pretty easy to identify because they have that crook in their wing and the sort of the black elbows, but the crook in their wing is and long-winged bird is an osprey. And you'll, like I say, you'll see them in hawk watch areas. They now they're nesting all the way up to the Canadian Maritimes. I mean, they winter. They're a cosmopolitan bird. They winter over in southern United States, Central America, and South America down as far as Argentina. They when the lakes freeze, they're out of here. They just simply move south. They are completely dependent on fish. They plunge in. So if you are at a site where you can see an osprey over a pond or a lake, it's wonderful to just watch them for a couple of minutes. They'll hover over the water, kiting, and then they will see a fish on the surface and just plunge feet first into the water. When they pick up that fish, they'll take it to a perch to eat it, and they'll turn it so that its head is facing in their head's direction to reduce the resistance, the wind resistance. It's really fun to watch them do that. I mean, they seem to know what they're doing. I mean, they really do. So they, yeah, they're a great bird to watch. And if you are able to see one actually catch a fish, it's really pretty remarkable. They're very, very adapted to that. They actually have kind of like scales on their feet so that slippery fish don't slip out. Amazing. Anyway, these are all adaptations. So let's try the next slide. So the next bird is the Harrier, which was formerly called the marsh hawk. And it got its name because it was primarily nesting on the coast in the salt marsh areas, but it also hovers over marshes and grasslands in a fashion that is also dihedral. So they'll sort of kite also. They very slowly fly over these grasslands hunting for rodents, meadow voles, chipmunks, whatever, but primarily voles and mice. But and they're sexually dimorphic. So the males are, we call them gray ghosts. They're gray. The females, on the other hand, are brown, and the young are usually with rusty breast feathers, so that they're relatively easy to identify. They're primarily coastal nesters, but they are a couple of pairs that nest in the Berkshires, and October Mountain State Forest has had a nesting pair of Harriers. The new name is Northern Harrier. for the last maybe 5 or 6 years. There's been a pair up there, and juveniles have been seen as well. So they winter in southern United States. They are not a terribly common migrant along the ridges, but you can definitely see a Harrier or two if you're up on a hawk watch site and the conditions are favorable. All right, let's try the next slide. So the Kestrel. So now we're in falcons. And so you'll immediately recognize that these birds are different structurally. They have long pointed wings, and the common falcon in this area is the Kestrel, the American Kestrel, although the Merlin, which is the American Kestrel used to be called the Sparrow Hawk. The Merlin, a one size bigger, was called the Pigeon Hawk, and the Peregrine, of course, the largest of the falcons, other than the gyrfalcon, which we see extremely rarely. I don't think we've ever had a gyrfalcon record in the Berkshires, but the Peregrine was the duck hawk. So these birds are designed to particularly hunt shorebirds, Merlins in particular, and peregrines love shorebirds. The Kestrel, on the other hand, is an open field nester, and it uses boxes, and you can see that there's a couple of illustrations of Kestrel nest boxes. So you're driving by a big field or a pasture, and there's this 15-foot high nest box. It's a fairly good sized nest box. It's a nesting box for American kestrels. My good friend Ron Rancati and Rick Dobb have probably placed 30 or 40 of these boxes up in North County. I think the furthest south is in Lanesboro, but they are encouraging nesting kestrels because they are nest box users. So one thing that I always was questioning, because I had a bunch of kestrel nest boxes out as well in South County and Central County, was whether or not the kestrels that were fledged from a nest box would have a preference to return to a nest box to raise their young. And that's where banding might be really helpful. My nest boxes did not really afford themselves to banding, but Ben Nickley has taken over a lot of them. And Ben is a nesting kestrel nest box aficionado. So he does a lot of banding, and I think he's actually going to be presenting a program on kestrels at the Berkshire Natural History Conference, which we'll talk about in just a short while. But yeah, so kestrels are probably the only, maybe a Merlin or two, and an occasional peregrine, but falcons are more coastal migrants. They tend to migrate more toward the coast. You can see them. So I see that there's a Mount Tom peregrine falcon documentary by a friend of mine, Ray Aslan, and I think we could share that link also. You could probably Google it and get it. I think it's a YouTube video that Ray has done on peregrines. So let's try the next slide. All right, so now we're into vultures, which are not hawks, but they are often seen in hawk migration sites because, once again, they're lazy and they like thermals, so they will soar around. So we have two vultures. I'm not sure that black vultures are actually breeding in Massachusetts, but they are regularly seen in South County. And they will also winter over in some numbers, depending on the carrion that's available for them to eat. Apparently, they don't have a terribly good sense of smell. So one of the things that they tend to do is follow the turkey vultures, which have an incredibly good sense of smell for dead meat, carrion, and then they will hone in on the dead animal. Yeah, so they do, in some cases, winter over in Berkshire County. We will get them on the Christmas bird count in Sheffield, in South County. So they have slightly different constructions. They're shorter winged. The black vultures are shorter winged, shorter tailed, and have a flat glide. When they are soaring or gliding, they tend to hold their wings flat, whereas turkey vultures are the consummate dihedral bird. I mean, you'll see turkey vultures and you'll look up and you'll see that V shape, the way they hold their wings up slightly, and you'll immediately recognize that it's a turkey vulture. You can't really see the head color. The black vulture has a black head, the turkey vulture has a red head, but that's not something you're even going to see at a distance. You'll see the shape of the wings, and you'll see that the turkey vultures have the caudal edge of their wings are pale, whereas the black vulture does not have that pale. You can see that clearly on this slide, but they have their wing tips are light colored, and so that's a key. And they're also, their tails are considerably shorter. The turkey vulture gets its name because it has a long turkey-like tail. So that's those are the vultures, and like I said, you'll get a chance to see those on a Hawk Watch site, and sometimes, they'll be along the ridges, and just turkey vultures will be migrating. I know that down by Russell on the Westfield River, I've seen 50 or 60 turkey vultures migrating at the same time, and not another bird with them. But yeah, so that's the vultures. So let's talk very briefly about a couple of terms that are okay. So you'll also see ravens during migration, and so let's talk a little bit about soaring versus gliding, because this is important. Soaring is when a fixed wing bird has caught a thermal and is gaining altitude. Gliding is when a bird sets its wing like a crow and glides into a perch. Crows will never soar. Ravens do soar. So that's one distinct difference. The other is the construction of the bird. Ravens are a time and a half as big as a crow, and they have a wedge-shaped tail. So if you see a dark bird, a black bird in flight soaring, it's a raven. It's not a crow. Crows just don't soar. They have their rounded off edges of their the end of their tail, whereas the wedge shape is a tip off for a soaring bird, a raven. So there's another term that's probably really useful, and that is GIS or JIS. It's been bastardized to jizz and jis and, you name it. But what it derives from, you're at a Hawk Watch site. There's an experienced Hawk Watcher behind you, and there's a black spot in the sky way the heck out there. And the experienced Hawk Watcher puts his binoculars up and says, "Hey, we've got a peregrine coming up over this ridge." And sure enough, as it gets closer and closer, it's a peregrine falcon. And you say, how did you identify that bird so far away? And he said, well, it just had the gist of a peregrine. So gist is a term that was technically used during the Second World War when British pilots, dogfight pilots, were fighting the Germans in these small planes, buzzing around in the air. And you remember the story of the Red Baron. Well, he was a dogfighter. And so they would sit these British pilots down and they would flash pictures of friend and foe airplanes on the screen. And they would have to test them to see whether or not they were going to be shooting down their own planes or recognizing from very many different shapes. The general impression and shape is what GIS means. And so they would have to pass this test in order to become a fighter pilot. And so it was extremely important at different angles to see whether this plane coming at you or banking was a friend or foe. And so that term has kind of been carried over into the bird world, and it's sort of like the gestalt of bird watching is to see and recognize many, many features of a bird that could help you with identification. Very often the field marks that you see in the field guide are not available in a soaring bird. They're just not. So it's more the shape of the bird, the depth of the wing beats. The lighter birds tend to have, they're more buoyant. Look at a herring gull versus a ring-billed gull. And you can see that the ring-billed gull, because it's a lighter bird, bounces. It's more buoyant. And the wing beats are different than a herring gull, which is a much more labored looking wing beat. So the buoyancy of the birds, the shape of the birds, the flight pattern, they're all important in the general impression and shape. General impression is where it's at. So it takes a lot of experience, but the best way to gain that experience is to be on a hawk watch site with an experienced hawk watcher. So let's go to where we can see hawks migrating. All right, so because we're approaching the best time of the year for golden eagles, and this is kind of ironic, but the Golden Eagle restaurant at the Hairpin Turn in North Adams is probably one of the best places to see golden eagles in migration. And remember, don't be upset if you only see one golden eagle in the course of a full day of hawk watching, because you're lucky if you see one, quite honestly. So there are some other spots that you can see golden eagles with a little bit of luck. Mount Everett in Mount Washington, not Washington. Sorry, Mariah. It's close, but Pittsfield State Forest. Just before you get to Berry Pond, there are two places where you can stop at just at the azalea field, and you can walk to the right through a small path through the woods and go out to an overlook that looks north. And that is a great spot. That's where the Hoffman Bird Club used to do its hawk watching. And the next place is, if you go just a little bit further on the road up to Pittsfield State Forest, there's a big clearing with some picnic tables. That's another great spot to watch for broadwings or golden eagle. Blueberry Hill in Granville is where the Hoffman Bird Club with the Springfield Bird Club, the Allen Bird Club, does their group hawk watch with another bird club. And so Forbes Hill in Windsor is another spot that is pretty good for hawk watching as well. So, and so as time goes on, more and more of these places are discovered because someone knows the terrain and where they should be watching, and they find a ridge and they go up. Remember, those thermals rise up the ridges, and that's the ticket to good hawk watching, is be on a ridge where the thermals are going to be hugging the land and rising right up along the ridge. And you'll find that maybe you've discovered a new spot, and then eventually you'll go back and forth to it, and year after year you'll check it out. And if it becomes an established hawk watch spot, you'll bring your friends and have a great time. So that's some places like where to go. Some quick tips just to get the most out of this experience. Probably the tip that I mentioned about going with a group where there is an experienced hawk watcher. And remember, there are places in Massachusetts that are clearly great spots, and so there's usually an experienced hawk watcher there, and they are doing the counts that are reported to the Hawk Watch Association. And so check the weather. So Mount Tom, by the way, is an awesome spot for hawk watching on the Mount Holyoke Range. And we've seen at Parsons Marsh, the opening day of Parsons Marsh, there was a couple of kettles of broadwings that were flying over, and it was great. And that's a picture of Parsons Marsh on the bottom, with me and someone else looking at broadwings that were migrating over the thermal created by the water. It was a perfect day for broadwings. So what you want to do is you want to try to go out with a club where there will be an experienced hawk watcher, give you a little help with identification. And believe me, it's not that easy, because as these birds are moving, they're setting their wings in different positions, and you'll be amazed at how different, like a harrier can look when it's swooping and gliding and soaring, and it just, there is. So there'll be some references on the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about them. But check the weather. Remember, cold air, bright sun is great for thermals, and cold fronts push a lot of birds. If there's a northwest wind, you're very much more likely to see raptors. That's because they're pushing out of the Great Lake area where they've concentrated, and they're coming down, and they'll get right by the area that you're watching, hopefully. Be there by 9 o'clock to set up, bring a lunch, water, and maybe a hat, a field guide, pencil and notebook, so you can take down some notes, because once again, there's nothing beats experience and being in the field. You can look at all the books in the world, but nothing beats the field experience. So get out there and bring your binoculars. And so I'll talk just very, very briefly, because I have a couple of minutes, maybe. Do I have a couple of minutes, Mariah?
Yes, you've got some time.
Okay. So I'm going to just talk very briefly about binoculars, because it's amazing how many people have binoculars and don't know what those numbers mean or how they are referable to bird watching. So the power, so the first binocular that we see is a 7x35. We refer to it as 7 by 35. 7 is the magnification that the binoculars are going to give you. The second number is not so important to know what it is, but what is important is if you divide the first number into the second number, you get a number called the light gathering value. And that's important because a lot of bird watching is done early in the morning where there's relatively dim light. You want to get as much light gathering as possible. So a 7 by 35 binocular is going to give you 5 light gathering units. And an 8 by 42 is going to give you just a little bit more than 5, which is ideal. an 8x42 is perfect. So birding binoculars are generally between 7 and 10 power, but here's the catch. A lot of people who see that 7 to 10 power binoculars are great for bird watching immediately say, well, I'll get the 10 power because the bigger the better. Well, there's no free lunch. So what happens with the 10 power binocular is that the field of view becomes extremely narrow. So unless you're really experienced and get that binocular right on a bird, you're going to be searching for that bird. 7 power gives you a wider, much wider field of view. It's the perfect beginning birder binocular, and you can see things perfectly well with 7x35 binoculars. You can spend a lot of money on binoculars, or you can get a pair of binoculars that are not cheap, but there's a lot of features that you can get, like armor coating, nitrogen purging to keep the lenses from fogging up, armor coating so when you drop those binoculars, which you will do eventually, they bounce instead of break. If they go out of alignment and you're looking through, there are some adjustments that you can make to customize your binoculars to your eyes. Remember, your eyes are slightly different. As you get older, they don't age the same. So there is an adjustment on the right eyepiece of the binocular that allows you to make the adjustment to correctly accommodate the difference in your two eyes. So that's important. And if you don't know how to do it, ask somebody who has binoculars and is more experienced, and they can show you. So I think the best thing to say at this point is get out there and enjoy yourself. And so let's see some resources on the next slide. So there are lots and lots of field guides. So the one that I like in particular is Pete Dunn's Birds of Prey. It covers hawks, eagles, falcons, and vultures of North America. So it customizes to North America. It's photographs in large part by a friend of mine, Kevin Carlson, who I grew up with. Another is the Peterson Field Guide to Hawks of North America. And you'll see how confusing things can be when you open that field guide and look at the different postures of these hawks as they're gliding and soaring and swooping. And David Sibley, who grew up down, well, he lives in Massachusetts now and has written a couple of great field guides. Hawks in Flight came out with Pete Dunn, David Sibley, and Clay Sutton years ago, and it was the go-to hawk field guide. It's in pocketbook or paperback rather, and it's easily packed to you to your Hawkwatch site, so you can bring it along. The Hoffman Bird Club in the Berkshires is also a great resource. We have about the 20th of September or thereabouts on a weekend. Hopefully the weather is going to be cooperative, and we do a hawk watch with the Allen Bird Club from Springfield at Blueberry Hill in Granville. So that's a great spot to go. And on a hawk watch, you'll see other birds as well. I mean, so looking at those pictures on the hawks in flight, give some thought to how you could identify them. So the one on the big bird on the right is a golden eagle with its distinct white patches, its very large size, and its white tail band. The upper bird above the golden eagle is a rough-legged hawk with it's a buteo, and it's got those dark patches. And the bird on the left is a peregrine falcon with the pointed wings and a bird that can actually, if you've never seen a peregrine falcon hunt, it's rather incredible. I remember I was on Monhegan Island with Peter Vickery one day. We were sitting on a cliff looking out over the ocean, and there were a number of this was the third week in September, and there were a couple of peregrine falcons on the cliff, and they were probably hungry. They're always hungry. And so a rose-breasted grosbeak flew out over the ocean, and Peter looked at me and said, "There is no bird in the world I would not like to be than that rose-breasted grosbeak," because it, and so two peregrines swooped down on it at the same time. One of them hit it behind the neck and killed the bird immediately, and then swooped down and picked it up. The other one fought for it, but lost. So anyway, they are incredible. The peregrine falcon can, in its swooping dive, it can reach 175 miles an hour, which is outrageous. I mean, it's incredible to see this bird fold its wings and just dive on a prey item. It's like, you'll appreciate birds of prey. Okay, I think I am going to open it up for, let me mention once again, the 7th Annual Berkshire Natural History Conference, which is coming up at Berkshire School on Saturday, November 18th. Great program of speakers, and hope that you'll make it. There's a lunch that goes along with the $25 fee, and I think it's $15 for students. We would love to have you come along. We had a couple of years of interruption because of COVID, but we're back on track, and Berkshire School is a great venue for the Berkshire Natural History Conference. There's a nature quiz that is pretty tough, but there's some gifts that you can get if you pass the nature quiz and do well. Anyway, is there anything else, Mariah, before I allow you to open it up for questions?
Yeah, I don't think so, Ed. Just wanted to, preliminarily say thanks so much. I'll give you another shout out at the end, but your enthusiasm really comes through, and we so appreciate you being here this evening. Before we open it up to questions, I'd love to pass it over to Rich Montone, our Director of Development, just to say a few words real quick.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Ed. Good to see you. Terrific
Hi,
presentation.
Rich.
Thank
Yes,
you. Hello.
I'm glad you made it to the program.
Yeah, I was a few minutes late. I apologize for that. I got
no problem.
Waylaid in the woods this afternoon. So
the best place to get waylaid is in the woods.
Exactly.
You know
exactly. But I'm the director. For those that don't know, my name's Rich Montone. I'm the director of fundraising at Berkshire Natural Resources Council. I see a number of donors in the attendees, so thank you all for your support. It's enormously helpful because BNRC is donor supported. So all of the conservation, the protection of wildlife, the protection of farms, support of farmers, the climate resilience, the free access to all of the Berkshire outdoors that's provided through BNRC and programs like these are all thanks to donors. So thank you, donors. And if anybody here would like to make a contribution, I'll put the contribution link in the chat. Thanks. And thanks, Ed. Looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Rich.
Good deal. So now we have a couple of ways you could ask your question. You could plug it right into the chat. You could add it to the Q&A, which is separate from the chat. Or if you'd like to raise your virtual hand, we can unmute you and let you ask your own question. So I have a question just to get us going a little bit. Being a novice birder myself, Ed, I'm curious if you don't have binoculars, or especially like the good ones, can you see kettles, especially the broad-winged hawks, with your naked eye if you look hard enough?
Yes, you can. And so probably that's the the first thing at Parsons Marsh. You're out on the platform out on the end of the marsh, and you see this, all of a sudden you see this broad-winged hawk, and then you begin to raise your eyes, and it's actually a kettle of broad-winged hawks. there's 100 or more in that kettle, but you're going to be seeing the closest ones, the ones that are the lowest in altitude, because you don't need binoculars, but you'll certainly appreciate the kettles more if you have binoculars. I mean, but you can certainly appreciate them without binoculars.
Great. Thanks so much. I'm not seeing any other questions pop up at the moment.
I have a bunch of questions.
Yeah, go for it,
So
Charlotte.
I'll ask one of them. Let's see. Can you repeat how to identify a red-tailed hawk juvenile? Just because, you know, they're the most common hawks we see. I really want to get that down.
Right. It's a tough one because the juvenile red-tailed hawk doesn't have a red tail. It's got a finely banded tail, but probably the most common field mark that's reliable is the belly band. So this, on the lower part of the breast, there will be a darker band across the white breast, and that is the belly band. It's referred to as a belly band. If you're looking at a perched bird from the back, you'll see, I don't have a great picture of it, but you'll see a white, kind of white, not a distinct V, but you'll get the impression that there's a V on the back of this bird that starts with the shoulders and points down towards the tail base. So that's probably the key. It's also, I mean, in terms of being a big-bodied bird with, you know, a short tail and broad wings, but it's the common roadside hawk. So, you know, there's no substitute for studying these birds. What you want to avoid doing is seeing a red-tailed hawk and then just checking it off and saying, oh, that's a red-tailed hawk. Look at it, watch it, and hopefully it will fly, and you'll see the depth of the wing beats, and you'll see that big body, and you'll see it glide into a perch. But there's no substitute for time in the field, and take advantage of every hawk that you see. And I should mention also that perched birds are a lot harder to identify than flying birds, because the flight pattern on some birds like accipiters is the real clue to their identity. Whereas perched, you know, what is that, a Cooper's or is it a Sharpshinned? I can't really tell, but once they start flying, you'll be able to, you know, to tell a little bit easier. So I guess the answer to your question is, it's not easy. Stay with it, and just take advantage of every opportunity to learn as much as you can from every bird that you can see. Anybody else?
We did have a question come into the Q&A, so I'll ask that now. So they said, kind of off topic, but maybe you'll know the answer. They were driving over the causeway on Onoda Lake this morning around 7:30 a.m., and there were a bunch of people out there with binoculars and cameras. Do you have any idea of what they were looking for?
Ducks.
Ducks.
Yes, I can probably tell you who they were. Members of the Hoffman Bird Club. So this is waterfowl time. It's also a great time to be looking for a golden eagle, but it's also the time that the ducks, like the bay ducks that nest up in way north of us, will be migrating to open water on the ocean come November. They'll be there. The ocean won't be freezing, so these are birds that are nesting north of us, but they're migrating toward the ocean, the open water of the ocean, to spend the winter. These are the scoters, the golden eyes, the mergansers, that the scop, that are only seen here because our lakes freeze over. They're only seen here in November. And I'll put a shout out for the Hoffman Bird Club, because we are having our waterfowl census, which is actually the oldest waterfowl census in the country. It was started back in the 40s, I think, by Bart Hendricks. And we're going to be having it the day of I can't remember the exact date, but it's the day that the time changes. So, so go on to the Hoffman Bird Club website if you're interested in waterfowl, because that's what they were looking for. They were looking for ducks that are migrating and will be here only a short time. Black scoters, white-winged scoters, surf scoters, like I said, the scop and golden eyes and mergansers. They're all on their way to the coast, and this is their stopover spot to feed up and rejuvenate before they head to the ocean for the winter.
Very cool. Glad that question was asked.
Yeah,
I'll put it
am
out there
too.
for any other questions that folks have to input them into the chat or the Q&A now. I think Charlotte might have another one, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, don't be shy
Yeah.
about questions, because there is no such thing as a dumb question. If you're questioning something, it's worth an answer. So I will try my best to answer a question. So don't be shy. Come out and ask it. We'll see what happens. Charlotte,
Thanks,
you had
Ed.
another question?
Yes, this is a pretty basic question. What makes hawks different from eagles? Why are they different?
Oh, it's the genus. So actually, the only true hawks are the accipiters. The falcons are technically not hawks. They're actually, I think the DNA has put them next to vultures, believe it or not. And so ospreys and harriers are different. What makes them different? I think, I'll share this with you because I believe that this is probably maybe the answer. It's convergent evolution. They all hunt prey, whether it be birds or rodents. These are carnivorous birds. They're not going to eat any salad. Okay, they're not vegetarians, and they're not. The kestrel maybe is an insect eater, catching dragonflies and that sort of thing. But for the most part, these are meat-eating birds. And so they have evolved the same characteristics as in convergent evolution to perhaps be completely different from one another DNA-wise and evolutionarily wise, but they've converged because their prey items are similar. So they are, they're all constructed to hunt, and that's what they do. They hunt. I hope that answers the question. It's kind of vague, but it's my explanation, because you can see this in so many other different species that are completely unrelated evolutionarily wise, but because they've adapted to the same habitat. Well, an example is sea lions and seals. Convergent evolution has created them to look almost identical to one another, and yet they're evolutionarily completely different. I mean, sea lions are derived from bear ancestors, and seals, I don't remember what, but they're very, very different. But they're the habitat that they live in, and the fact that they're all fish eaters has converged their physical appearance phenotype to look almost identical to one another.
Thank you. So we've got a couple other chat questions that popped
Okay.
up. One person said they saw a duck at Parsons Marsh last week, and it looked just like the pictures of a harlequin duck, which they had not previously identified. Is that a possibility?
It would be an enormously rare possibility. And the reason for that is that harlequin ducks nest way north of us. They winter over on salt water. There is only one Berkshire record for a harlequin duck, and that was Zach Adams, who found one on Woods Pond that had previously been sighted at Turner Falls in, on the Connecticut River. It would be an extremely rare. So more than likely, it is a wood duck male in eclipse plumage. Eclipse is the plumage that the ducks go into after they've bred. They go into a short period of time where they molt their feathers, and they go into what's referred to as eclipse. That means they blend. Okay, and they don't look like the gaudy wood duck male at that time. There could also be a young wood duck, which has not received its full breeding plumage. They'll get into their breeding plumage over the winter, and then obviously retain it for the spring for breeding. But eclipse plumage is probably because there's quite a few wood ducks at Parsons Marsh. But get out there. Parsons Marsh is I will say it's a great spot to bird. In fact, Parsons Marsh is one of the few places in the state that we had nesting pied-billed grebes for a couple of years in a row. An incredibly rare bird. Used to be much more common until acid rain destroyed a lot of the habitat. But Parsons Marsh is one of the spots that pied-billed grebe breeds. I have seen the adult with young at Parsons Marsh. It's a great bird. And if you have nothing else to do, play the call on Merlin or the Sibley app and hear the raucous call of the pied-billed grebe, because that's the best way that you can identify a bird on territory.
Great, thanks, Ed. The next question is from Peter, and they ask, is Hurlburt Hill in Ashley Falls a good place to watch a hawk migration?
Yes.
And then how about Mount Wachusett in Princeton, Massachusetts?
Yes, Mount Wachusett, technically like Mount Tom. It's a favorite place for hawk watchers to gather. And Hurlburt Hill by Bartholomew's Cobble down in Ashley Falls is also a great spot. I'm not going to say that you're going to see kettles of broadwings every day when favorable conditions are, because it's not really along a ridge per se, but there is some terrain there, and it's a hill, and it's got. And another thing you want to look for in an open area on top of the hill, so that you can see without trees blocking your horizon. You can see the hawks moving from north to south. But Hurlburt Hill, yeah, and get down there. It's a great spot. Maybe you'll discover Hurlburt Hill is a terrific hawk watch spot. I've never hawk watched down there, but yeah, so excellent.
I think we've got time for this one last question that came in. Do you have any spots on Mount Greylock that you'd recommend?
That's a tough one, because I've never hawk watched on Mount Greylock, but I would say if you are going up Rockwell Road to where just before the summit, there's the North Adams overlook could be potentially a great spot. You're looking down on the Pfizer Quarry in Cheshire, and you know, the elevation is right. And so, yes, there's no reason in the world to assume that Mount Greylock isn't a great hawk watch spot. And from the summit, where it is relatively clear, you should be able to see things. You're just as likely to see some really good passerines up there. Um, you know, birds that aren't hawks, songbirds. But yes, I would love to find out whether, if you go up to Mount Greylock and you see some hawk migration, that you let the Hoffman Bird Club know that, because we have never hawk watched up there. So, but good luck and get out there. So that's the ticket here, is get out there and hawk watch. They're really cool, and you'll appreciate them. And I think when you see your first kettle of broad-winged hawks and it numbers over 100, you will become a hawk watch aficionado. You will go every year in the third week in September, around September 20th, if conditions are right. And it doesn't have to be on a weekend. You can go by yourself, go up to Pittsfield State Forest and count hawks. It's great. And all that information is so valuable for the Hawk Watch Association. So if you find or discover a new spot, please let us know. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Ed, and for everyone who participated live. And I'll just say, it's nice to have tools that we can take with us and utilize, now, but also a lot of information that can spark our continued learning and planning for the peak fall hawk migration next year. So thanks again.
Yeah, get out there. That's the main thing.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, great show. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh,
right.
Last note, I want to
Yeah.
shout out to Mariah for putting this program together and all her technical help and advice. So thanks, Mariah. Great
You
job.
did the hard work. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.